it on the rump and discovers that it is, in fact, a bear. I've always loved this woodcut that shows Pa and Laura looking at the wolves howling outside of the cabin. And the book was a big success during the Depression, sold well for a children's book. But in the wake of that success, Rose did something that would upset her mother very much. It was really this kind of fateful thing. She saw how well her mother's book was selling, and I think felt a little bit of professional jealousy or competitiveness. And so she stole her material and wrote a novel based on the Ingalls lives, in which she used all the real names. She used Charles and Caroline. And Laura found out about this in the worst possible way. Rose didn't tell her mother, and Laura saw it in an ad in Publishers Weekly and was horrified and very angry, I think, and it caused a real rift between the women that would last for years. And soon enough, Rose moves away from the farm permanently. She had been living in the old farmhouse, and the minute that she left, the Wilders moved right back into it. But Laura pressed on with her work. She continued the series, and Rose helped her long distance. Rose was a very talented editor in her own right and encouraged her mother to emphasize that this was the true story of an American family, pioneer family. And at the same time, Laura is leaving out the most squalid aspects of their experience, the stuff we just talked about, the poverty, her father's debts, the entire chapter in Iowa. And to promote this book, Plum Creek, Laura went to Detroit to a department store called Hudson's Department Store, to a book fair. She was very intimidated, but she pressed on with it and gave a little speech, which became one of the most important statements that she ever made about her writing and its motivation. This is the pamphlet from that book fair. She wrote, "I realized I had seen and lived it all the successive phases of the frontier. First the frontiersman, then the pioneer, then the farmers, and the towns. I understood that in my own life, I represented a whole period of American history." And of course she did. But another thing she said in this talk, which she would really embrace in years to come, was that everything in her books was all true. And that's an important claim because, of course, it wasn't true. So it's clear that Laura, I think, wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe in this loving reinterpretation of her parents' success. It was her homage to them. She wanted to believe her own fiction, and I think so do we. A lot of Prairie Fires is about why we want to believe the fiction. We like to see ourselves as intrepid pioneers. We don't like to consider what the costs were to ourselves or others. But soon enough, she finished the series. On the left, you can see the original hardbacks, which were quite beat up by generations of children reading them in libraries. And in fact, if you have a complete set of the Little House books that are in good shape, you can sell them for quite a lot of money. That yellow set was the ones that I read. I think the blue ones are still for sale. So if you read them, you may have read one of these. Rose moved back east, where she became kind of a curmudgeon. She was an isolationist, very interested in libertarian ideas, reducing the size of government. This photo shows her testifying before Congress in 1939 against the U.S. entering World War II. And both Rose and Laura in this period have become very strongly opposed to the New Deal and FDR, like many other farmers, because a lot of the policies that were instituted at that time to try to control prices of commodities, pork and wheat and so forth, because there was a glut of all those things, involved asking farmers to leave land fallow, to not plant crops. They went in and destroyed a lot of farmers' livestock, including, the beloved family cow and so forth. So this made farmers very, very angry. And I think in many ways, the relationship between farmers in this country has never, the relationship with the federal government has really never recovered. But while Rose is off doing this in Congress, her parents are getting older, and I think that they had a very pleasant retirement. Laura was quite proud of herself, very happy with what she had achieved. Almanzo died in 1949, and Laura would live until 1957 and died just a few days before her 90th birthday. This shows readers, people coming to visit her. And that was not really, though, the end of the story, because all these places were named in the books, readers could figure out where this stuff happened and started traveling around and visiting all these towns. And the towns, recognizing an opportunity, rebuilt some of the little houses. Very few of them had survived. This is a replica of the Little House on the Prairie in Kansas. And this is what's called Laura's Living Prairie, the homestead site near De Smet. And they've built, lots of stuff there. You can go there in your RV and take a ride in a covered wagon. So it's an interesting experience to see what has happened to these places. But of course, the most famous fictional adaptation of Laura's work was the TV show Little House on the Prairie in the 1970s. And note the house in the background for something that's about, so much of these books are about houses, about building houses. And the house that was built for the TV show had this baronial stone fireplace. It was 2 stories, had very nice windows. So it really emphasized the Ingalls family as prosperous and well-to-do. And the producer, who had a big fight with Michael Landon, ended up calling it as a joke, "How affluent is my prairie?" And of course, here we have Michael Landon as Charles Ingalls. And I think you can see that this is really more about the 1970s than it is about the 1870s. I mean, I'm not trying to criticize the show. I know lots of people love it, but it is a very different thing than the world presented in the books. The TV show was thanks to this man, Roger McBride. He was Rose's adopted grandson, informally adopted. Rose had died in 1968 and left the entire Wilder estate, which was worth a considerable amount, to McBride. He never knew Laura, but he was responsible for selling the rights to the TV show. And used the money that he got to further his political ambitions. He was in the Vermont State House for a couple of years and ultimately ran for president, the first guy to run as a libertarian in 1976. He became friends with the Koch brothers, for example, the oil and gas people in Wichita. And Laura remains celebrated in many kind of ways today. This is somebody carving an image of Laura out of butter at the Iowa State Fair. And finally, here's the design for the Laura Ingalls Wilder Award by Garth Williams. Many of you have probably heard of the American Library Association that changed the name of this award recently. But I think the thing that strikes me about this image is that they used an image of Laura, the fictional character, not Laura Ingalls Wilder, the person, which I think just is another illustration of how we've always identified with the fiction rather than the reality. So the whole idea of Prairie Fires was to kind of cut against that kind of myth-making and explore who Wilder really was, the whole story of her life. And that is the conclusion of my Laura talk. But brace yourselves, because now we're just going to take a very brief look at my next book, which is called Murderland, and Crime and Bloodlust in the Time of Serial Killers. And this book is really sort of a true crime history that looks at the myth behind serial killers. You can see the image of Ted Bundy in front, superimposed on an image of the smelter, the lead and copper smelter that was in Tacoma, Washington, for about 100 years and polluted that town fairly convincingly, I would say. And the idea of the book is to look at what's called the lead crime hypothesis, which posits that the explosion of lead in the environment and our exposure to it in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s led to a sharp rise in crime. And then the removal of lead ultimately resulted in a sharp drop-off in crime in the 90s. So I think, how are we doing on time here?
If any students need to leave, we completely understand, and we can continue a little bit longer and then stay for some questions. But some students may need to leave. So if you do, we understand, and but we're fine with time.
Well, I don't need to say too much more about this. I will just mention that the grasshoppers come back in this book because there was a serial killer in the Midwest who was exposed to lead through lead arsenate, an insecticide that was produced in Tacoma, Washington. This is just an image of the smelter in Tacoma in early days. And this suggests, I think, how damaging lead is to all different parts of the body, but especially to the frontal cortex, to neurological development. Kids who are exposed to lead do exhibit personality changes that can take place when they're young adults. That was Jerry Brudos, the killer I was talking about. And finally, this book will be published on June 10th, and I'll be at Seattle Town Hall to talk about it on June 12th. So I'll end there, but thank you so much for listening.